Most people think we left the gold standard because governments wanted more control. That explanation feels intuitive. It sounds political. It sounds intentional. And it's wrong. The truth is far more uncomfortable. We didn't leave the gold standard because we wanted to. We left it because the system could no longer survive. And once you understand why, you'll also understand why silver is crashing right now. Because what's happening to silver today is not random. It's not manipulation. It's not a failure of the metal. It's a signal. For thousands of years, gold wasn't money because governments said so. It became money because reality selected it. Scarce, durable, recognizable, impossible to fake. Every civilization that reached a certain level of complexity discovered gold independently and used it for the same reason. So when people say we should have stayed on the gold standard, they're not wrong emotionally. Gold feels like honest money. But here's the part most people never learn. The gold standard didn't fail because of corruption. It didn't fail because of greed. And it didn't fail because of bad policy. It failed because credit outgrew scarcity. And that same tension between scarcity and credit is exactly what silver is exposing today. Before we talk about silver's crash, we need to understand something deeper. We need to understand how the gold standard actually worked. Not the myth, not the slogan, the mechanism. Because once you see the mechanism, everything else makes sense. Gold didn't become money because it was declared money. It became money because it solved a problem that every growing society eventually runs into. How do you store value over time in a way that doesn't decay, disappear, or depend on trust? Early humans tried everything. Grain rots, livestock dies, tools break, shells can be copied. Paper doesn't last. Gold was different. It didn't rust. It didn't corrode. It didn't lose mass. And it was rare enough that you couldn't just find more whenever you needed it. That combination mattered. Scarcity alone isn't enough. Plenty of things are scarce. Durability alone isn't enough either. Plenty of things last a long time. Gold had both. And just as importantly, it was obvious. You didn't need a government seal to recognize it. You didn't need a certificate to trust it. You didn't need an institution to verify it. You could see it, feel it, test it. That's why gold converged as money across civilizations that never interacted with each other. Egypt, China, India, Mesopotamia, the Americas. No coordination, no global agreement, just the same solution emerging to the same problem. And as trade expanded, gold's role evolved. Carrying large amounts of gold became impractical, so gold went into vaults. And claims on gold began circulating instead. Paper notes didn't replace gold. They represented it. That distinction is critical. Under the gold standard, money was not created freely. It was constrained. If gold entered the system, money could expand. If gold left the system, money had to contract. Gold wasn't just backing money, it was limiting it. This is the part people romanticize without understanding. A gold-backed system feels stable because it prevents abuse. But that stability comes at a cost, because once money is tied to a physical constraint, everything built on top of it becomes constrained too. And modern economies are not simple barter systems. They run on credit. Hospitals are built with credit, railroads are built with credit, factories are built with credit. Entire cities exist because someone extended credit into the future. Credit is not optional, it's the engine of growth. And this is where the tension begins. Gold is scarce by nature. Credit expands by necessity. For a while, those two forces can coexist. But eventually, one of them has to give. To understand why the gold standard had to end, you need to understand how it actually functioned in practice. Not in theory, not in textbooks. In reality, under the gold standard, money was not created by demand. It was created by possession. If a central bank had gold in its vault, it could issue currency against it. If that gold left the vault, currency had to be destroyed. This wasn't a suggestion, it was the rule. Gold in meant money in. Gold out meant money out. Now think about what that implies. If a country ran a trade deficit, gold flowed out. If investors lost confidence, gold flowed out. If another country offered better returns, gold flowed out. And when gold flowed out, the domestic money supply shrank immediately. This is where the real problem begins. When money contracts, credit contracts with it, banks have fewer reserves, loans become harder to get, interest rates rise, investment slows. This isn't theoretical, it's mechanical. A shrinking money supply means fewer loans, fewer projects, fewer businesses, fewer jobs. Even if prices fall, even if money becomes more valuable, economic activity still declines because growth doesn't happen with valuable money. It happens with available money. This is the part that's deeply counterintuitive for most people. They assume if money is scarce, it must be good. But scarcity cuts both ways. Scarce money rewards savers, but it punishes borrowers. And modern economies depend on borrowing. So under the gold standard, every economic shock became amplified. A recession caused gold outflows. Gold outflows caused monetary contraction. Monetary contraction deepened the recession. The system had no shock absorbers. It was rigid. and rigidity feels safe until stress hits. Countries became obsessed with their gold reserves. Gold outflows were the two most feared words in economic policy. Because losing gold didn't just reduce prestige, it forced contraction. Governments didn't lose flexibility gradually. They lost it instantly. And the larger and more complex an economy became, the more dangerous this rigidity grew. What worked for small, slow-moving economies became a liability for industrial, credit-driven ones. This wasn't a political problem. It was a scaling problem. The gold standard worked best when economies were simple and populations were small. As economies grew, the constraint didn't loosen, it tightened. And eventually, something had to break. This is the moment where most explanations go wrong. They tell you, we left the gold standard because politicians wanted more power, or because governments wanted to spend more, or because discipline became inconvenient. Those explanations feel satisfying. They give us villains. They give us intention. But they miss the real cause. We didn't leave the gold standard because of a decision. We left it because the system stopped working. By the early 20th century, economies had changed faster than gold ever could. Populations were exploding. Industrial output was scaling rapidly. Global trade was expanding. Credit markets were becoming essential, not optional. But the money supply was still chained to how much metal could be pulled out of the ground. That mismatch was fatal. Every year, more people needed jobs. More businesses needed financing. More infrastructure needed funding. But gold production didn't care about demographics. It didn't care about innovation. It didn't care about demand. Gold supply moved slowly, unpredictably, and geographically. Sometimes new deposits were found. Often they weren't. And when they weren't, the system tightened. Governments tried to manage this. They raised interest rates to protect gold reserves. They cut spending to stop gold outflows. They imposed austerity during downturns. All of it made the problem worse. Because tightening money during economic stress is exactly how you turn recessions into depressions. This isn't hindsight talking. Policymakers at the time knew this. They watched credit dry up. They watched unemployment surge. They watched productive capacity sit idle, not because people couldn't work, but because money wasn't available to connect labor to demand. The gold standard turned scarcity into policy, and eventually, reality pushed back. Countries suspended convertibility not as a power grab, but as an emergency measure. One suspension became two. Two became permanent. Not because discipline disappeared, but because the constraint was incompatible with a modern credit-based economy. The gold standard didn't fail morally. It failed structurally. It imposed a hard ceiling on a system that needed flexibility to survive. And once that ceiling was hit, there was no clever workaround. You either broke the rule or broke the economy. History shows what choice was made. And that choice explains far more than just the past. Because we didn't eliminate constraints, we replaced them. At this point, it's tempting to think the story ends with gold. It doesn't. Because when we left the gold standard, we didn't leave scarcity behind. We just stopped tying money directly to it. Gold retained its role as a store of value, but it stopped being the constraint on credit. Silver, however, moved into a very different position. For much of history, silver sat just beneath gold. It was money. It was used in trade. It circulated widely. But as economies industrialized, silver took on a second role. It became an input: electronics, solar panels, medical equipment, industrial manufacturing. Gold stayed mostly monetary. Silver became hybrid. And that hybrid nature is crucial. Silver behaves like money when liquidity is abundant and confidence is high. But it behaves like an industrial commodity when credit tightens and growth slows. That makes silver far more sensitive to the state of the financial system. Gold reflects confidence in money. Silver reflects stress in credit. So when people ask, why is silver crashing? They're asking the wrong question. The better question is, what is silver reacting to? Because silver doesn't crash in isolation. It responds to tightening conditions, higher real interest rates, more expensive credit, slowing industrial demand, reduced appetite for risk. In other words, silver reacts when the system starts behaving more like a constraint and less like an expansion. This is why silver is volatile, not because it's broken, not because it's manipulated, but because it sits at the intersection of money and industry. Gold is patient, silver is sensitive, and right now, sensitivity is being tested. To understand why silver is falling now, you don't need a conspiracy. You don't need manipulation theories. And you don't need to assume silver has failed. You just need to look at liquidity. When liquidity is abundant, credit is cheap, risk appetite is high, industrial demand feels stable. In that environment, silver benefits from both sides of its identity. It trades like money, and it's demanded like an input. But when liquidity tightens, that balance breaks. Higher real interest rates raise the cost of holding non-yielding assets. Credit becomes more selective. Industrial investment slows. Projects get delayed or canceled. Silver feels all of that at once. Gold can sit quietly during tightening cycles. It doesn't depend on factories being built or panels being installed. Silver does. So when monetary conditions tighten, Silver doesn't wait. It moves early. This is why silver often falls before the economy visibly slows. It's not predicting the future. It's reacting to the present. Tighter credit means fewer new projects, less industrial expansion, lower marginal demand for inputs. At the same time, investors become more selective. They prefer assets with clearer monetary roles. They prefer simplicity. They prefer certainty. Gold benefits from that shift. Silver doesn't. This creates the pattern we're seeing now. Silver underperforms, not because it lost its value, but because the system is prioritizing liquidity and safety over expansion and growth. In other words, silver is acting exactly as it should in a tightening environment. And this is where the connection to the gold standard becomes clear. Under the gold standard, tightening was automatic. Gold outflows forced contraction. Credit shrank whether policymakers wanted it to or not. Today, tightening is discretionary. Rates rise, balance sheets shrink, liquidity is withdrawn deliberately, different mechanism, same pressure. Silver is responding to that pressure. It's telling you that expansion is becoming harder, not impossible, not over, just harder. And when expansion slows, assets that depend on it feel the impact first. The story of the gold standard is often told as a political failure. That's convenient. It gives us someone to blame, but it's not accurate. We didn't leave the gold standard because discipline disappeared. We left it because the constraint became incompatible with the system built on top of it. Gold was too scarce for a world that needed flexible credit. That doesn't make gold bad. It makes it honest. And it doesn't mean we escaped reality. It means we changed how we interact with it. Today, money is no longer constrained by metal. But credit is still constrained by confidence. When confidence is high, liquidity flows. When confidence tightens, liquidity retreats. Silver sits right at that boundary. It's not pure money like gold. And it's not just an industrial input either. It's a stress signal. When expansion is easy, silver thrives. When expansion becomes difficult, silver reacts. That's what you're seeing now. Not a failure, not a mystery, not manipulation, a message. The gold standard taught us something important. Hard constraints feel safe until growth demands flexibility. Unlimited flexibility feels powerful until confidence demands restraint. Every monetary system lives between those two forces, scarcity and credit, discipline and expansion. We didn't eliminate the tension. We learned to manage it differently. And assets like silver remind us that the tension never goes away. It only changes where it shows up. So when you see silver moving sharply, don't ask what's wrong with silver. Ask what conditions are changing that silver is sensitive to. Because markets don't move randomly. They respond. And the lesson of the gold standard isn't about the past. It's about understanding how constraints reveal themselves in the present.